Dr. Masuma. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful conference. I'm truly humbled to be in the presence of such great minds and such experts of foreign policy and international relations. And frankly speaking, to chair a session in the presence of all these great minds and all my bosses sitting here, it's nothing short of blasphemy. But I am very grateful to Dr. Masuma for giving me this opportunity to commit this blasphemy. Now, it's a very difficult thing to speak at the end because everything that had to be said has been said, and in a very competent and cohesive manner. So I had a few written comments, but I decided to leave them aside. And I just wanted to leave you with a few thoughts on each issue that was discussed in the last 40 minutes, last over an hour and 15 minutes. And as regards the flux that the world is going through, it reminds me of a very old Chinese proverb, or it's sort of a curse. And roughly translated, it means, may you live in interesting times. And I feel that that curse has come full cycle, and our generation here is right in the middle of that cycle, going through the birth pangs of a multilateral world. And things are going to probably become far more difficult before they ease out and we have delivered this baby of multilateralism, a multilateral world, and we move on. As regards the competition which we have talked about between China and the US, which is shaking the world now, we all know that the rise of China is no brainer. 250 years ago, Napoleon said, let the giant sleep, for if it awakes, it will shake the world, and it has awoken and it's shaking the world. Allama Iqbal had said in 1936, 33, and Mushahid Saab and I are very fond of quoting these two verses from Allama Iqbal. One was, Ko laakh zami dekh, falak dekh, faza dekh, mashriq se ubharte hue suraj ko zara dekh. So what was it they referring to? Of course, the rise of China. And the second was, of course, Gaya daure sarmaya dari gaya, tamasha dikha ke madari gaya. So, lage, Himalaya ke chashme ubalne lage. So, I mean, the rise of China is no brainer. Everybody was expecting that it was going to rise. So why is there so much fuss about its rising? So I feel personally, I've lived in China twice and served there. So I've studied China for over 20 years now. I think it's very important to understand where a nation is coming from. And China being a civilizational state of 6,000 years ago, 6,000 years, we know for a fact that it went through 100 years of humiliation that it wants, which was not a sort of the usual, but an aberration. So they want to lock that up in their memory and arrive to the rejuvenation of the motherland. And that was only possible first by, of course, development and eradication of poverty, which they've done, which was their first centennial goal. And now they're on to their second centennial goal, which is the rejuvenation of the motherland. And they want to do that by the time the People's Republic of China becomes 100 years old, which is 1949. And that actually simply translated means the coming back of all the islands, whether it's Taiwan or the South China Sea islands, back to the motherland. And that is what's creating all the political and strategic and military confrontation between the two, in which the rest of the world is, of course, caught. But more than that, I think this competition should also be seen, as Iqbal had said, from the point of view of the clash of ideologies, the clash of economic systems, the clash of political systems, the clash of governance system. I'll just give one example and then I'll move on. In COVID, you would recall that the entire world thought that this would be the end of the political system and governance system and health system of China, because it would not be able to deal with this. And that is why we saw the sanctions and the stigmatization and everything of China. But it showed the world that its system actually delivered the best as far as COVID thing was concerned. And therefore, the tensions have suddenly risen, and we have the Containment of China Act and this, that, and the other. As far as India is concerned, I think, again, we need to know where this nation is coming from. The concept of Akhund Bharat is totally incomplete without the area which now constitutes Pakistan. And that is where I totally agree with Jalil Abbas Jilani Sahab when he said that, individuals make a difference. Leadership makes a difference. Vajpayee Sahab had sort of transcended from being a politician to a statesman. Unfortunately, Modi has a different background. So he has really not been able to break away from his mindset and from being a local politician into a statesman. And he is personally, an extremist Hindu. And they want to do what I think we all should remember, that Hinduism was not born on the banks of Ganges. Rig Veda was written on the banks of Indus. And the first time that Ramanaya was sung was in Texla. The gentleman who killed, assassinated Indira Gandhi, his last death wish. Mahatma Gandhi. Yes. His last wish, when he was in the death cell, was that you burn me, but preserve my ashes. And when Indus becomes a part of India, then you throw my ashes in the Indus River. So this is the mindset of Modi. Modi had promised, it was one of his promises, that Kashmir issue would become a non-issue, and he's shown that. So now how you proceed on Kashmir is another story. I do not want to talk about it now. In my view, I think the best policy is to, do something about your own part of Kashmir. What is happening in Kashmir these days is very, very troublesome. As far as Palestine is concerned, I think the present crisis in Israel and the Palestinians has shown a couple of things. One, I think the invincibility of Israel is no more there. That aura that you had of Israeli defense forces and of Mossad is completely fake. They couldn't predict it. And to stop the Iranian missiles, the entire Western world, including some of the Muslim countries, Jordan and Egypt, had to, get their forces together to avert that. So I think that invincibility is over. Along with that, this has also announced unfortunately, sorry my saying so, the death of Ummah. The Ummah doesn't exist anymore. We have seen that. We've seen that. We saw it in Kashmir, but nobody would listen to us. But the Palestinian diaspora has, and the Western world has now ensured that, there is no Muslim world there. The division in the Muslim world is very clear. The war is already extending. Let's hope that it does not extend further. Two more, I think, victims of what is happening in Palestine is one is the UN. That is completely eroded. Unless it is sort of reformed, not just the Security Council, but the entire comprehensive reforms, this is not going to work. The moral foundation on which EU was, established, which is human rights and justice and all, completely eroded, completely exposed. Now, as far as we are concerned, how do we navigate ourselves through this flux? I will just say one thing, and that is the last sentence. We have spent 75 years building our relationship with the Chinese. We call it time tested, all weather. But I strongly feel that the time to test the relationship is now. We have managed to have a very balanced policy because if we hadn't, we would have been part of the Korean War. If we hadn't, we would not have been a nuclear power. So, 10 seconds. Therefore, now the time has come when we need to decide where do we want to see ourselves in 2050 when China emerges as the political and technologically, economically the first country of the world, on the right or the left. Or we want to do what another Chinese proverb says, is it wise to waste a very precious pearl to kill a sparrow flying high in the sky? Simply put, do you want to sacrifice your long-term interest for short-term interest? I leave it to you. Thank you very much. I've never spoken so fast and so quickly. So now the floor is open to questions. So kindly identify yourself and kindly give the name of the speaker you want to ask the question from.
Ambassador Hussain, one thing is for sure, and that is crystal clear, that both India and Pakistan won't go back an inch on their respective stances on Kashmir. Do you think, Ambassador, that there's a middle of the road solution that both these countries can start a working relationship and both these countries can put Kashmir on hold and move on? Is it possible? Is it workable?
In fact, if you had, this is partly what I was trying to say, that because of the way geopolitical scenario is being transformed at the global and regional levels, there is no satisfactory settlement of Kashmir from Pakistan's point of view or from the point of view of the Kashmiri people available in the short term or in the medium term or in the foreseeable future. That is the harsh reality and we have to come to terms with it. Now, what do we do with it? That doesn't mean that we should forget about Kashmir. That is also not, that is another extreme and I will not go for it. But we need to have a long-term strategy. The long-term strategy should focus on building up Pakistan politically, economically, militarily, in terms of science and technology, so that our national power builds up. Meanwhile, we have to keep the issue alive by maintaining our moral, diplomatic, and political support to the Kashmir cause. But as I mentioned, this has to be done both in declaratory terms and operational terms. In the past, there has been some difference in approaches in our declaratory policies and operational policies, and I won't go into that. So we have to be very, very clear. So this should be our long-term goal. In the short and medium term, we need to make the life of the Kashmiri people on both sides of the line of control easy, and that is by engaging India in a dialogue in which, and I mentioned 4 or 5 issues we need to do. One is to improve the situation of human rights in Indian occupied Kashmir, to go or encourage India to go for demilitarization, to end across LOC violence, and also to give maximum autonomy to both sides, to the Kashmiri sides on both sides of the LOC. So there have to be, but these short-term measures have to be within the framework of a long-term approach for a settlement of the Kashmir dispute in the long run. In the short term, if you go for a settlement, it will be done on Indian terms. Now there is another thing also that we can do, and to which I had referred partly very quickly, which is that while you are working for this long-term goal, what do you do with Azad Kashmir and Gilgit and Baltistan? Right now, they are in a state of limbo. India has already taken a very, from their point of view, a very clear and strategic initiative. They have incorporated, annexed totally Indian occupied Kashmir and Ladakh and Jammu area, all that. I think we can't do that, but what we can do is to make life and developmental processes and political implementation of Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan in our political setup. We should incorporate them as fifth and sixth provinces of Pakistan on a provisional basis, so that whenever in 100 years or in 50 years or 60 years, already 75 years have passed, nothing has happened. Our position and Kashmiri's position on Kashmir has worsened. So when I say 100 years, it's just nothing extraordinary. So you have to, it may be 50 years, for all that I know, if you get lucky, it could be 40 years. You have to do this thing on a provisional basis, make the life of people in Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, much better from every point of view, politically, socially, economically. And then hopefully something will happen in later years which may result in a fair settlement of the Kashmir dispute. One final point. Kashmir is also a civilizational dispute. Pakistan and Kashmir lie on the fault line of Islamic and Hindu civilization. This is the reality. This is a point which was made by Huntington in his book on the clash of civilizations. Civilizational disputes don't get settled in years or decades. It takes centuries. Look at what is happening in Palestine. You can trace its roots to the time of crusades. So Kashmir, unfortunately for those who are concerned, lies on the fault line of Islamic and Hindu civilization. My prediction and assessment is that there is not going to be solved in a satisfactory way from our point of view or from the point of the view of the Kashmiri people in the short term. The rise of Hindutva in India will not allow it, and but we also should make one more point I would like to make is any policy on Kashmir which weakens Pakistan is counterproductive. So our Kashmir policy should be such which strengthens Pakistan and keeps the hope of a fair settlement of the Kashmir issue alive.
Thank you very much. My name is Rafiuz Siddiqui, and I think my Foreign Office colleagues know me well. I'm a retired ambassador and now working with the Sindh Ombudsman. So my question basically pertains to Palestine. Half of my question has been answered by Ambassador Naghmana already, but I wonder that there has been a very lackadaisical response of Islamic world over the issue. And then we compare it with the Latin American countries like, Colombia, Bolivia, Brazil, Nicaragua, and etc. They have not only come out openly against Israel, they have been, exhibited unwavering support for the Palestinian cause. Some of them even broken their diplomatic ties with Israel. They have recalled ambassadors. Take the example of South Africa also. They are in ICJ. And where are we? Where is the Muslim world? Although you have, as I said, you have answered half my question, but my question to the panelists, would they like to throw some more light over the issue? Thank you very much.
Certainly, Chief. I'll try my best, Chief. We have seen a very disappointing response from the Muslim world, and I think it's blatantly obvious why this is happening. You have governance regimes led by monarchs and strongmen all over the Middle East. And monarchs and strongmen don't like, entities such as the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and entities that are influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood. We know that is a serious issue. And Hamas is something that I think many of the monarchs in the Middle East would be very happy to get rid of because it represents the will of the people, because it represents a number of these issues. So frankly, I think that is one major reason. The other, of course, is this new world view that we see, the new helm that has been taken by, say, MBS and the UAE rulers as well, which is very pragmatic. It doesn't, it is, I think, a harbinger of the dissolution of whatever image of the Ummah, as Mr. Naghmana Hashmi mentioned. It does signify that to an extent. At least that seems to be an approach. That's also, I think, one of the reasons Pakistan, who has enjoyed a very good relationship with many of these Middle Eastern countries, is now not having the same warm response from them. So that's my quick few thoughts on this.
We have
Uh, Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My name is Piotr Topishkanov from Russian Academy of Sciences. My question is for Dr. Greg Miles. What is your explanation of what happened to ECOWAS when the nations left this group, and what does it mean for the regionalism in Africa? Thank you so much.
Dr. Mills, did you hear the question clearly? We can't hear
It's a
you.
very good question.
You want us to repeat the question, please? Maybe.
I could hear you. I
Okay,
could hear
good.
the question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I think it's a very good question. And I think that ECOWAS demonstrates all of the difficulties that Africa has. That the coup-led countries, let's term it that, in the Sahel, essentially would not do what ECOWAS wanted them to do. And so preferred to leave the organization or opt out of the organization rather than carry out its wishes. And of course, this is the challenge of regionalism per se across Africa. In a sense, you're only as strong as your weakest member, only as strong as your weakest link. And this is one of the reasons, to link this back to the previous question, if I may, that a lot of people in Africa are concerned about South Africa's foreign policy focus on the Middle East. This is not something that has universal support because there are such big issues in Africa, not least in the Sahel, not least in the Horn of Africa, and creeping into West Africa, that a lot of people say, well, why aren't we focusing the same degree of attention on Sudan, for instance, as we do on Gaza? Why aren't we taking the Sudanese warlords to the ICJ or to some form of criminal or international scrutiny in the same way that we're doing with Israel at the ICJ? So there is a moral equivalence argument being made about South African foreign policy in this regard, and I'm sure that's probably not far from the lips of many critics elsewhere on the African continent. But regionalism per se in Africa is unfortunately trumped often by a bunch of very narrow political and economic interests. And this has long been the difficulty in grouping very differentiated countries together, which comprise, as we've just heard from the Middle East, a great deal of difficulty getting unanimity in countries where you do not have democracy per se, or you have very different, as in Africa, economic conditions and standards and strengths and weaknesses. So, Africa from outside looks like one thing often. It's often dealt with by the international community as one thing, and Africans tend to feed that viewpoint by having a single international body through the African Union. But in fact, it's a highly differentiated continent with very different strengths and weaknesses among its members. The strands uniting it are that we share the same piece of real estate, but in fact, we share many differences, unfortunately, as well.
Thank you very much. And that just leaves me to thank the panelists and thank Dr. Hello. Acha. And thank Dr. Masuma for providing this excellent opportunity to hold this important session. And thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Dr. Mills. That brings us at the end of